class. Welcome to a rainy Wednesday evening in South Dakota, but we're getting some much needed moisture from the sky. And I'm just going to ask if everything's coming through fine for choppiness before I get going. It's not choppy, hopefully. Great. I saw a shaking head, so I'm going to take that as a good sign. So we are going to be getting into Acts chapter 23 tonight. Last time, our last study, we covered 1.5 chapters, so we really cooked right along. We finished up Acts 21:31 through Acts 22, verse 30, and we found Paul being beaten as these Jews who hounded him, they attempted to enact their version of mob justice. And we read how the Romans, they were up in that fortress, the castle of Antonia. Remember how that was kind of on the edge of the city, the edge of the temple grounds, so that they could oversee kind of everything there. And the Romans up there, they had noticed the tumult. They intervened with the soldiers, and then they removed Paul to safety in that castle. Afterwards, Paul gave a defense. He gave his first of 5 defenses, and he gave that to the commander. Now, as he recounted the tale of his own conversion, Paul continued to emphasize this idea that, hey, I'm not preaching on my own desires. I'm not preaching on things on my own accord. I'm doing this under God's inspiration, under God's authority, under God's direction. So that was kind of the general theme or thrust throughout Paul's first discourse. Tonight, it is my intention and hope to get us through the next chapter, through Acts 23. So we're going to see if that happens, and, and we'll do the best we can. But some of the sections will go kind of quick. So, verse 1, Acts 23, verse 1. Then Paul, looking earnestly at the council, said, Men and brethren, I have lived in good conscience before God until this day. So we have this word here that Paul was inspired to, Luke was inspired to write. And it says, whoops, wrong button. I'm trying a new video program out tonight, so let me know your thoughts on it. But he said, looking earnestly. And that word in Greek is atenizo, Atenizo. Atenizo means to gaze or to fix eyes intently upon something. You may recall, I'll just reference for you Luke 4, verse 20. Jesus, he was in the temple. They gave him the scroll. He's reading from the scroll of Isaiah, and he stopped halfway through a verse and applied it to himself, saying, Today this is fulfilled in your hearing. And all the eyes of everyone were atenizo. They were fixed intently upon him. Now, you'll remember that the Sanhedrin, we covered this early in the Acts study, they were the highest Jewish ruling council in Jerusalem. And the Sanhedrin was composed of 71 members. Now, according to excavations, archaeologists believe the Sanhedrin likely met in a building referred to as the Chamber of Hewn Stones. Chamber of Hewn Stones, rather. So here's one artist's depiction. This chamber of hewn stones, which is today adjacent to the temple. So you can kind of see that there. This is where the Sanhedrin would meet. And so they have an entrance from one side and an entrance on the other side. Here's an idea of what it might have looked like from the inside. So the exact location is debated, but the Talmud teaches that it was built into the north wall of the temple. And they say that half of this chamber of hewn stone was inside the wall of the temple, and the other half was on the outside. So not exactly sure of the specific location, but it's generally accepted that it was at least somewhere near the Temple Mount. So Verse 2 now. Then Paul, looking earnestly, and the high priest Ananias commanded those who stood by him to strike him on the mouth. So Ananias, in the gospel accounts, we find this high priest Caiaphas. Caiaphas had a father-in-law named Annas. Now, this Ananias is not the same as Annas. Totally different guy. This is somebody else. Remember, we're about 57 AD now. So roughly, what, 26 years after the death of Christ. So different high priest. Josephus says Ananias was the son of a guy named Nebuchadnezzar. So Ananias, he was appointed 10 years prior by Herod, either 9 or 10 years prior, either 47 or 48 AD, and he ruled for about 10 years. Now, Ananias, he was known for his cruelty. He was known for his greed. Barclay says that Ananias was notorious as a glutton. He was known to be a thief, a robber, and a collaborator in the Roman service. We also know, for example, Acts 5:17 tells us that the high priest would be of the sect of the sect of the Sadducees. And Ananias commanded them to strike Paul. Well, why would he do that? There's a number of different theories to this. Now, William Barclay says, well, the way Paul began was a challenge. He referenced the Sanhedrin as brothers and put himself on equal footing with the court. Uh, for the normal beginning, when addressing the Sanhedrin would be, and with the high priest present, would be rulers of the people and elders of Israel. So that's what William Barclay says. Other scholars suggest that it was customary for the high priest to speak first. And since Paul took it upon himself to ignore that tradition, he was punished for it. Whatever the case, what we see is it's a further example of elevating man's laws above God's. Verse 3 Paul said to him, God will strike you, you whitewashed wall. You sit to judge me according to the law, and and do you command me to be struck contrary to the law? So, according to Mosaic law, we know touching a dead body would make a person ceremonially unclean. So it was the custom to paint the tombs, paint the graves with whitewash so they wouldn't be touched or stepped on or tripped over by mistake. William Barclay says when the high priest ordered Paul to be struck, what he was doing was actually breaking the oral law. And the Mishnah said, whoever strikes the cheek of an Israelite strikes, as it were, the glory of God. So he was going against the oral law. Now he would have been a Sadducee, so that wouldn't have been as big of a deal as it would have been to a Pharisee, but he was still causing great offense and still breaking some generally accepted laws in the Jewish community. When Paul referenced him as a whitewashed tomb, basically what he's saying here is you only appear righteous, but you're dead inside. So imagine saying that to the religious ruler. Pretty rough stuff. Verse 4 and 5. Those who stood by said, do you revile God's high priest? And Paul said, I did not know, brethren, that he was the high priest. For it is written, you shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people. And I'll quote for you Exodus 22, verse 28, which pretty much says just that. Exodus 22:28 says, you shall not revile God, nor curse a ruler of your people. So Paul, he knew the scriptures extremely well. And that begs the question then, why did he say he didn't know that Ananias was the high priest? We have a few possible reasons. So I'll put a text up on my screen here. Will I put it up there? Oh, yep, here we are. So a few different reasons, potential reasons. Perhaps Paul was just caught up in the moment. and he just got all fired up and said, "You're dead inside." Maybe he spoke rashly out of anger. Certainly possible. Kind of seems a little bit unlikely. Possibly Paul had just been away so long that he didn't recognize Ananias as the high priest. Just jump ahead with me for a second to Acts 24, verse 17. As Paul is uh, in the next chapter, we'll see Paul before Felix the governor, and he's recounting his story. And he says, "After many years, I came to bring alms and offerings to my nation." So Paul had been away for a while. Perhaps he just didn't recognize Ananias as the high priest. Uh, Another idea is, well, maybe it was just sarcasm. Doesn't really seem like Paul's character to be sarcastic in that way. So, not sure that that was it. Possibly this just wasn't a normal assembly of the Sanhedrin, and the high priest then wouldn't have been sitting in his customary seat. And so Paul just kind of saw the crowd, didn't see the high priest specifically. In that case, the high priest maybe wouldn't have been wearing his priestly garments. So that's possible as well. It's also speculated that Paul had weak eyesight. We know he had been stoned. If you have stones, we're not talking pebbles. If you're being clobbered in the head by rocks, by big stones, there's a potential for it damaging your eyesight, for it caving in your eye socket. We know Paul had been beaten many times following his conversion. We know Luke has been accompanying him as a type of physician. He had different diseases, maladies, things like that. So conceivably, something could have affected his eyesight. William Barclay says, well, Paul's answer means that man sitting there, I never knew a man like that could be the high priest of Israel. Uh, that's possible as well. It doesn't necessarily convey the characteristic humility and deference that Paul was known for. In my opinion, remarkable anyway that Paul didn't really seem to defend his behavior, but he appears to have acknowledged his error and appears to have repented of it. Oh, sorry, I didn't recognize that as the high priest. I didn't mean to break the law. And it's worth noting here, Paul, he's being called into question concerning some of these laws, right? Uh, his views on the laws, but he makes it a point here to refer to the law when he explains his actions. And it indicates he wasn't trying to do away with God's instructions, but no, I hold a deep reverence for the scriptures despite being persecuted. So I think that's kind of what's going on here. And Paul's rebuke, though, of the high priest, you may reference Matthew 23, verse 27, and it seems to parallel Jesus's account of condemning the Pharisees for their hypocrisy. And he refers to them as, well, you paint all these tombs white, but somebody should have warned us to avoid you. So kind of a similar thing there. May not have been the exact way he's saying it, though. We don't know for sure. But noting that this had already gotten off to a pretty rough start, Paul makes a claim that he knows is going to make the Sanhedrin sit up and take notice. So, verse 6 through 9 of Acts 23. When Paul perceived one part were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, he cried out in the council, "Men and brethren, I'm a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. Concerning the hope and resurrection of the dead, I am being judged." When he had said this, a dissension arose between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. For Sadducees say there's no resurrection and no angel or spirit, but the Pharisees confess both. Then there arose a loud outcry, and the scribes of the Pharisees' party arose, protested, saying, "We find no evil in this man. If a spirit or an angel has spoken to him, let us not fight against God." So, not going to go through it in the same detail, but early in Acts, we did go through the Pharisees and the Sadducees, these two groups of Jews with a few major differences. Sadducees, They accepted only the written law. They believed in free will. They did not believe in the spirit world and angels and demons. The Sadducees did not believe in miracles. They did not believe in a resurrection of the dead. And remember, the high priest is a Sadducee. The Pharisees, on the other hand, smaller group, um, different estimates say there were only ever about 2,000 to 6,000 of them that existed. But they were much more, uh, we'll use the word extreme, passionate, committed is not the right word, more stringent, I suppose is the right word. And the Pharisees, they followed not only the written law, but the traditions and the oral law. And they taught the oral law as having the same validity as God's law. The Pharisees believed in predestination. Pharisees believed in a spirit world, believed in a resurrection of the dead. And this debate led some of these scribes of the Pharisees to find no basis for charging Paul. Verse 10 and 11. Now, when there arose a great dissension, the commander, fearing lest Paul might be pulled to pieces by them, commanded the soldiers to go down, take him by force from among them, and bring him into the barracks. But the following night the Lord stood by him and said, Be of good cheer, Paul, for as you have testified for me in Jerusalem, so you must also bear witness at Rome. Thomas Nelson's study Bible says that, warned by his friends not to go to Jerusalem, Paul may have begun to doubt his decision by now. Boy, I sure am getting persecuted an awful lot. I'm getting sick of getting beaten. But the Lord encouraged Paul not to be afraid because he was under the sovereign care of God. And as Paul had borne witness to Jesus as a prisoner in Jerusalem, so he would also do as a prisoner in Rome. Paul's chains would glorify God in ways that would have been impossible without them. Do you find that explanation comforting? Hopefully you do. Like us, Paul probably found himself wondering at different times, why am I doing this? Why do I have to suffer? If I'm doing the right thing, why is it so hard? Why do I have to keep enduring these trials? We know he did. We know at times he wondered about some of these things, but ultimately he knew the outcome, and he came back to that. He knew God's motivation. Paul knew God's purpose. Paul knew God's plan, and he knew God's plan not only for him, but he knew God's plan for mankind. And from instances like this, he knew without a shadow of a doubt, I know God exists and I'm doing the right thing. So he had that comfort. Verse 12 and 13. When it was day, some of the Jews banded together, bound themselves under an oath, saying they would neither eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. Now there were more than 40 who had formed this conspiracy. Now, this word in Greek for conspiracy, whoops, I apologize, didn't change that word, but let's see if I can change it right now. I know some people have eye issues. Hopefully that's a little better. For conspiracy, the word in Greek is sunomosia. Sunomosia. Oh, it should be mosia, because the I at the end is like the I in intrigue. So that's the pronunciation. It would be sunomosia, is the pronunciation of Koine Greek, if you care. If you don't, well, that's fine. But it's a combination of two words. Now, the suffix of sunomosia simply means to swear or take an oath. But the prefix son in Greek, that means to form a union. But the Greek word conveys a deeper meaning than simply just being united in an effort. The Greek word, the prefix son, it the type of togetherness that is implied or intended by this word, it implies an element of resemblance. It implies this idea of complete and total and utter harmony. In other words, there may be multiple members, but they are so united that you can't tell them apart. So that's what this word, this prefix son means here. In other words, these 40 Jews that banded together here, they couldn't be accused of just maybe being in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was abundantly evident that they were 100% committed, each on an individual basis, to carrying out this oath of killing Paul. And they were not going to let anything but death stop them. That's what the Greek word seems to mean. So who were they? Who were they? Well, according to Josephus, first century scholar, first and second century scholar, born at the end of the first century, uh, Josephus says that there was a radical group of Jews referred to as the Sicarii, Sicarii. And this radical group of Jews, the Sicarii, they were highly influential in the first century, and they lasted right around until the time of the first Jewish revolt, and that took place from 66 to 70 A.D. 70 A.D., temple torn down. These Sicarii, they existed. Well, I'm going to digress from my notes. All the Sicarii, they got chased down, and the ones who were back in their fortress, they all committed suicide rather than be subject to the Roman authorities. But some were not in the fortress, and they dispersed, and they just kind of petered out over the years. But the Sicarii, you can make a note for Acts 5, verse 37. These Sicarii, they were heavily influential until about 66 or 70 AD. Now, here we are, 57 AD. So they are really coming to the height of their power, and they will grow in power over the next roughly 10 or so years. These Sicarii, they are often associated with the anti-Roman government group known as the Zealots. We talked about the Zealots in an earlier study, but the Sicarii are actually this subgroup of the Zealots, and they were distinguished by their extreme tactics. So, uh, in effect, the Sicarii are what the radical leftist group today, Antifa, is to the Democratic Party. So Antifa is that, very violent group that always incites riots. They light things on fire. They try to kill and hurt and maim and just cause general destruction and do anything they can to bring down, well, the opposing government. But really, they're anarchists, really. But that's what these Sicarii were. That type of political group. So um, these Sicarii are the ones who would conceal daggers in their cloaks in order to assassinate Roman soldiers, assassinate Roman officials, assassinate Roman representatives. In fact, assassinate anybody that was just a strong supporter of the Roman way of life or government. And here's, let me show you here. You can see on the screen, here are some examples. The word, let's see, curved dagger is the definition of the word Sica, Sica in Latin. And so these Sicarii, they get their name from curved dagger. And you can see on the screen, there's some representations of curved daggers, and they're based on real artifacts that have been found. Here's one that is not showing up on my screen. Why is it not? Oh, I know what's going on here. I know what's going on here. Watch this. You'll say, there it is. There it is. Go ahead, say it. All right, there it is. This Sica, this is this type of curved dagger. Um, and this dagger would be about 14 inches long. And it's, we would think of the word today, sickle. That's where it gets its name. This has a curved design. It's intended, the Roman soldiers or things, they would have a shield. And so these, and of course, it's not just the Sicarii that used these weapons. Many people had them throughout the Thracian Empire and different things, but um, it was designed to get around shields so you could stab your opponent or cut their hand or get them in the back without working too terribly hard. And I was looking online, and you could actually buy an authentic Sika. They're about $7,500 starting at auction. So if you're interested in that, you could find them online. They're available. Britannica.com says the Sicarii were strict observers of and very zealous for Torah observance. So that was their main goal. And they were strongly opposed to pagan Rome, strongly opposed to polytheism, and they refused to pay taxes to the Roman government. Their common aim was to secure an independent Jewish state. Britannica.com says the Zealots were an aggressive political party whose concern for the national and religious life of the Jewish people led them to despise even the Jews who sought peace and conciliation with Roman authorities. A census of Galilee ordered by Rome in AD 6, as in AD 6, the year 6, spurred the Zealots to rally the populace to non-compliance on the grounds that agreement was an implicit acknowledgement by the Jews of the right of pagans to rule their nation. So, contrary to the idea of these extremists, these religious zealots, we actually see in Paul's writings a couple repeating themes. What do we see? We see Paul saying over and over and over in Romans, in Hebrews, if he's the author of Hebrews, in his letter to Timothy, be subject to just the people that you like. Well, no, he says, be subject to the governing authorities and make them beat you into submission. No, do it willingly. He says, pay taxes. Don't think that just because God made special promises to Israel, that you're somehow absolved from being under the authority of other people, as long as your ability to observe God's laws is not affected. And so Paul would say that over and over and over. And he probably took that from some of his experiences with these Sicarii. What takeaway lessons can you and I learn in 2025 from the Sicarii? Well, the Sicarii desired Jewish independence from Rome. Their activities, including sabotage, violence, political assassinations, all these actions were designed to gain that independence. And it did work, but only for an extremely short period of time before what? Well, the Jewish people were crushed, their city destroyed, their temple ripped down brick by brick. Following a few more rebellions after that, the Roman government decided, hey, we're going to make an example of these Jews. We're going to make an example of these upstarts. And so to humiliate them and to diminish and kind of quell any thoughts of a future rebellion, the Roman government removed Judea's status as a semi-independent client state around AD 135, and instead made them a full Roman province with a new name in that year. And that new name was intended to shame them into subjection. That new name was based on the name of some of Israel's most ancient enemies, the Philistines. Know that name of their new province, Palestine. Palestine. And, well, they called it Palestina at the time, but many years later, we're talking 1,800 years later, even after Israel was established as a small country, 1948, Palestine would still cause and is causing trouble today, strife, division, a great deal of turmoil for the Israelitish people and everybody involved. And it's all, well, it's not all, but much of it is because of an unwillingness to submit to authority, which ultimately comes from God. And now, God could foresee how some of that would play out. There are prophecies, but he knew how they would act. He knew they were stiff necked. And the lesson is clear for us as well. Our actions can have far reaching consequences. Our actions can cause collateral damage. And so it would behoove us to think carefully about our decisions, to think very carefully about our actions. It would behoove us to consider our the way we react to things in a long-term perspective. How will this decision I'm about to make, how will this way that I am correcting my child, how will this way that I am complaining about something that bothers me, how will my career decisions affect my children, affect my nieces, affect my nephews, affect my siblings, affect their children? How is this going to play out in the future? And that is something these Sicarii didn't think of. And we can hopefully learn some lessons from them. Verse 14. They came to the chief priests and elders, and they said, "We have bound ourselves under a great oath that we will eat nothing until we have killed Paul." Now, if these chief priests and if these elders, they were truly motivated by righteousness, well, what would they have done? They would have said, "Hey, you guys are way off base, and we understand you've made a vow, and you can get out of it under the old covenant laws." Now, James 5:12, James tells us, don't swear. Corroborates Jesus Christ's instruction in Matthew 5:34 to 37. He says, don't swear, don't vow, either by heaven or by earth. But well, these religious zealots, they didn't recognize Jesus Christ. They may have still made vows. But what happens if you or I make a foolish promise? What happens if you or I make a foolish vow, a rash vow? Are we in trouble? Are we doomed? Or is forgiveness still available? Well, yeah, it is. I mean, we have a precedent in the Old Testament, back in the Old Covenant, which these Jews would have been able to apply. Let's just take a quick look back in Leviticus, back in the Torah, in Leviticus chapter 5, verse 4 through 6. What happens if you do indeed make a foolish promise or a rash vow? Do we have a precedent today from which we can gain some insight? Yeah, Leviticus 5, verse 4 to 6. If a person swears, speaking thoughtlessly with his lips to do evil or to do good, whatever it is that a man may pronounce by an oath, and he's unaware of it, when he realizes it, then he shall be guilty in any of these matters. And it shall be when he is guilty in any of these matters that he shall confess that he has sinned in that thing. He shall bring his trespass offering to the Eternal for his sin which he has committed, a female from the flock, a lamb, or a kid of the goats as a sin offering. So, notice, the priest shall make atonement for him concerning his sin. And if you read through the next, I don't know, maybe verse 7 through uh, verse 13, or even further than that, I guess down through verse the end of the chapter, I suppose, what we find is these priests, they are supposed to be spiritual leaders. They're the ones that are supposed to be turning the people to righteousness. They're the ones that are supposed to be having this deep relationship with God. They're the ones who are supposed to be saying, you're going the wrong way. Turn, repent. Don't you remember what happened to our people when they broke God's laws and they went into captivity? Well, what are these guys doing? They didn't redirect these men. Their motivation is totally evil. Later on, it's likely these Sicarii or whoever they were probably resorted to enacting this principle, and the priests probably valued the fee that they had to pay pretty low because they were in on the deal too. But we see in the various prophecies, and I think specifically is it Jeremiah, where he takes the religious leaders to task. and maybe Isaiah as well. And you know, they're not doing what they're supposed to. They're focused on um, greed. They're focused on self-aggrandizement instead of leading the people to righteousness. Now, in our case, if we make a foolish promise, either a good promise made with complete knowledge and understanding, yeah, I promise I'll be over this weekend to help you, whatever, work on your house, mow your grass, and then we don't do it. Oh, I promised. What if we make a bad promise with anger? Well, God has provided a proverbial way of escape, right? We know with Jesus Christ as our high priest, he's the perfect high priest. We don't bring an offering of, well, whatever is in Leviticus 5, all those different things. We have Jesus Christ as our offering, our perpetual high priest. We have an opportunity to be in a right relationship with God the Father through the blood of Jesus Christ, and we can ask for forgiveness. Now, the leader's willingness to cooperate with the assassination conspiracy against Paul, it just goes to show how conscious they were of the weakness of their case against him. And we'll see that come up again in a little bit here. Now, verse 15, it says, "Now you therefore, together with the council, suggest to the commander that Paul be brought down to you tomorrow, as though you were going to make further inquiries concerning him. But we are ready to kill him before he comes near." So another attempt to enact mob justice by the Jews. Uh, what they're basically saying, excuse me, is when Paul is killed, which he will be, because we're going to do it. And when he's killed, you can put the blame on us and just, you don't know anything about it. You could just simply profess that you wanted to ask him some questions, and that's why he was there. Uh, there's this phrase that says, "We are ready to kill him." Notice the last four words here, before he comes near. Why does that matter? John Gill's commentary brings out that this was an assurance from the would-be conspirators that they would be far enough from both the temple and the council in order that the one wouldn't be defiled and the other one wouldn't be charged as being connected with Paul's death. So they're basically just they're trying to give the Jewish leaders not a way out, but kind of a fail-safe so they won't be implicated in this in any way. And so they get their cake and they get to eat it too because they want to kill anybody that sympathizes with the Roman government. So it's like a win-win for them. Verse 16. So when Paul's sister's son heard of their ambush, he went and entered the barracks and told Paul. Now, Holman's study Bible says most likely Paul's sister lived in Jerusalem, possibly indicating his entire family had moved there after Paul's childhood in Tarsus. The Greek of this verse suggests Paul's nephew was in his late teens. It is not stated how he came to know of the plot, but certainly the air was ripe for such a plot. Now, Albert Barnes suggests something a little different. He says, well, we know Paul had been previously sent to Jerusalem for education, so it's probable that this young man, his nephew, was also sent there for the same purpose. John Gill's commentary says that Paul's nephew could have been there on account of his studies, and maybe he was a pupil to one of the doctors, and perhaps that's the means by which he came to know of this secret, and that such a number of men were in ambush to take away his uncle's life. So a couple different theories there. We'll also notice in the next verse. Let's just read the next couple of verses here. Verse 17 and 18, Paul called one of the centurions to him and said, "Take this young man to the commander, for he has something to tell him." So we do notice that verse 17, Paul did not share the information with the centurion. He took the pertinent information and he brought it directly to the guy in charge, the one in charge, most likely able to deal with the situation. Also, we know sometimes the walls can have ears. Never sure who's listening. And in addition, the commander would have been known for being loyal to Rome and thus desirous to protect a Roman citizen. Uh, Albert Barnes says that Paul had the privileges of a Roman citizen, and since no well founded charge was brought against him, it's probable that he wasn't closely confined and his friends would have had free access back and forth to him. And we will see that at the very end of this chapter. Uh, verse 19 through 20. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't read verse 18 yet. So he took him, brought him to the commander, and said, Paul, the prisoner, called me to him and asked me to bring this young man to you. He has something to say to you. So just emphasizing again the fact that Paul was able to have visitors. Verse 19 through 22. Then the commander took him by the hand, went aside, asked privately, What is it that you have to tell me? And he said, The Jews have agreed to ask that you bring Paul down to the council tomorrow, as though they were going to inquire more fully about him. But don't yield to them, for more than 40 of them lie in wait for him, men who have bound themselves by an oath that they will neither eat nor drink till they have killed him. Now they are ready, waiting for the promise from you. So the commander let the young man depart and commanded him, Tell no one that you have revealed these things to me. So in verse 19, kind of a strange thing that Luke notices or records anyway. It says the commander took him by the hand. Uh, John Gill, Albert Barnes, other commentators, they recognize something in the Middle East, other places in the world. It's a lot more common than it is in America and more socially acceptable. First of all, to have more contact with people. Many other cultures have a lot more physical contact. Just go to India sometime and you will know that. But also, even men will hold hands sometimes. Now, that's weird. That is totally wrong in our culture, but it's a norm in many other cultures. And so it wouldn't have been seen as something weird. Um, Also, other these commentators they note specifically that this would have been an expression of civility, kindness, and humanity toward the young lad. And this would have not only showed the commander to be a man of good upbringing, but it would have demonstrated a certain degree of respect towards Paul, and it would have encouraged this young man to speak freely while sharing his message. And the fact that he went aside into another room, it shows us that the situation probably had the potential to turn volatile very quickly. And we're going to see this in the next verse. So verse 24, 23 and 24 now. So the commander, he called for 2 centurions, saying, Prepare 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen to go to Caesarea at the third hour of the night. Provide mounts to set Paul on. Bring him safely to Felix the governor. So Caesarea was the capital of the province. And Thomas Nelson's study Bible makes the obvious observation that apparently the commander thought the threat of assassination was serious enough to commit almost half the entire garrison of the fortress of Antonia to escorting Paul at least half of the way. So remember, we've got 800 to 1,000 people, I'm sorry, soldiers in this fortress, right? We've got a lot of soldiers, and he's sending 400 of them plus all these horse soldiers. Um, Big deal. Third hour of the night. Luke and the other synoptic gospel writers use the Hebrew reckoning to record times, as opposed to John's gospel. He used Roman reckoning. So Roman reckoning goes 12 to 12. Hebrew reckoning goes 6 to 6. So this would make this about 9 o'clock at night. Uh, there's a reference here as well to a guy named Felix, Felix the governor. This is just an artist's well, I should say this is an artist's rendering of a coin or a medal that had Felix's what's the word, personific likeness on it, his character on it. Felix was originally a slave, and Felix became procurator of Judea in AD 52. And he served until I think it's about 59 AD. So he served for about 7 years. From 52 to 59, he was removed in 59 AD from office for mishandling conflicts between Jews and Gentiles in Caesarea, which we'll notice he does. And he does it for 2 years. And then he's removed and replaced with Festus. And we'll see that in the next chapter. But verse 25 now, Acts 23, verse 25. He wrote a letter in the following manner. So Thomas Nelson's study Bible brings out that Roman law required a subordinate officer to send a written statement of the case with a prisoner when he referred the case to his superior. So this commander is just following due process and sending along this note. And the note begins in this way. Claudius Lysias. So we have his name here. Claudius Lysias. To the most excellent governor Felix. Greetings. Verse 27. This man, Paul, was seized by the Jews and was about to be killed by them. Coming with the troops, I rescued him, having learned he was a Roman. When I wanted to know the reason they accused him, I brought him before their council. Now, if we read this in the English language, kind of looks like he's touting himself, doesn't it? Like, I came in here and I stopped this and I rescued him and I am deferring to the Roman government. But that doesn't seem to be the case in the Greek. Now, Holman's Study Bible indicates that the English translation is misleading because the Greek grammar indicates that the commander rescued Paul and then he learned he was a Roman citizen, which is exactly what happened in chapters 21 and 22. And so, in preparation for this, I read through 20 different English translations and 21 actually. And most of them seem to lump the meaning, actually, all of them lump the meaning of this verse together, except for the New Living Translation. The New Living Translation translates this verse in the following way. It says, This man was seized by some Jews, and they were about to kill him when I arrived with the troops, period. When I learned he was a Roman citizen, I removed him to safety. So, in other words, what the Greek is saying and what the New Living Translation alludes to is the soldiers intervened to stop the Jews from killing Paul before they learned he was a citizen. But that's all they did. They saw a tumult, they showed up on the scene, stopped the killing. Then, once they learned he was a Roman citizen, they removed him from the situation entirely and brought him back to that fortress to safety. Oh, yep, thank you. Still have a picture on my screen. So it seems to be that Lysias wasn't touting himself, but that he was simply recounting the same things that Luke recounted in the past two chapters, albeit just in one sentence. Verse 28 through 30. When I wanted to know the reason they accused him, I brought him before their council. I found out he was accused concerning questions of their law, but had nothing charged against him deserving of death or chains. Verse 30, when it was told me that the Jews lay in wait for the man, I sent him immediately to you, and also commanded his accusers to state before you the charges against him. Farewell. So, concise, straight to the point. That is what a busy administrator wants. They do not want all the nuances and every minute detail. Just tell me the gist of the thing so I can get on with my day. I've got a million other things to do. That's exactly what Lysias did. He was probably very busy himself with more than 1,000 people under his purview. It seems as though he truly endeavored to do things decently and in order. Lysias could have simply written off the accusations as false, and or on the other hand, he could have gone along with them. Let's just kill this guy and be done with it. But he didn't. What he did was tried to follow due process. He didn't want to stand in the way of justice. He didn't want to stand in the truth, in the way of the truth of the matter, and so he deferred to those in authority over him. Really a good example, and yeah, maybe worth meditating on a little bit more. Lysias and his example. Verse 31. Then the soldiers, as they were commanded, took Paul, brought him by night to Antipatris. Antipatris. So if we look at this map, if you can't see my screen, well, there's a map. If you can see my screen, you'll look on the right-hand side, and you'll see Jerusalem. North of Jerusalem is Antipatris, and then a little ways north of Antipatris is Caesarea Maritima. Now, Antipatris, Thomas Nelson's Study Bible says Antipatris was roughly 40 miles away by means of a winding downhill road where an ambush would have been disastrous. So plenty of room for ambushes. Remember, a lot of times in the Gospels, you'll see we went up to Jerusalem when they're going south, because Jerusalem was up on a hill. So a lot of topographical changes down there, and would have been plenty of areas for ambushes. So I'm just going to leave this on the screen for a second. Antipatris was used by the Romans as a relay station for their troops. So they'd come from Jerusalem, stop over at Antipatris, have a rest, get some food, move on, drop off all the foot soldiers. The rest of the journey would be over open plains where there would be no need for a large number of soldiers. So the foot soldiers would then just return back to Jerusalem. So they're just accompanying for this dangerous or potentially dangerous part of the trip. So verse 32 through 35 now. Verse 32. The next day they left the horsemen to go on with him and returned to the barracks. When they came to Caesarea, they had delivered the letter to the governor. They also, had delivered the letter to the governor. They also presented Paul to him. When the governor had read it, he asked what province he was from. When he understood he was from Cilicia, he said, I will hear you when your accusers have also come. And he commanded him to be kept in Herod's praetorium. So Holman's Study Bible says Felix could have sent Paul to the governor of Syria, the one above him, but he decided to just try the case himself because he realized possibly that the evidence was so flimsy against Paul, and he just wanted to settle the case as quickly as possible. So that's what Holman's Study Bible says. In terms of a praetorium, we've got a picture here of the area where the praetorium is slash was. You can kind of see some ruins that have been washed away by the waves, in addition to the foundation on shore, and those would be connected. Herod's praetorium was a type of judgment hall that was built by Herod the Great, aka Herod the Builder, and it had soldiers' quarters. It had smaller apartments for political prisoners, and then it had jail cells for criminals. And if you're looking at my screen, notice, how do I put this? See where the road on the right-hand side curves down and then it stops. The part below the road, out on the peninsula, that is where Herod's what's the word I'm looking for? Herod's quarters would have been. The nicer section would have been the section that overlooks the ocean. The prisoners don't get to overlook the ocean in this particular place. This is a beautiful coast. This is where Herod would look out. This is where his officials would look out. And then it says, the different commentaries say that probably the area where Paul would have been is right in that kind of the area where the road stops. So he would have been kind of in between. Um, and that's where all those political prisoners would have been. Now, some commentaries say, well, Paul was not a flight risk, and not only was he not a flight risk, but he was a Roman citizen, and perhaps Lysias was a little bit feeling guilty of how he handled the situation previously, or uh, just wanted to make sure he did nothing wrong. And maybe people were uncertain. So some sources say, well, maybe Paul just stayed in the quarters with the soldiers, which would have been better quarters even than the smaller apartments for the political prisoners, because he spoke Greek and he could easily converse with them. So those are some different ideas, different thoughts. Not necessarily doesn't necessarily matter one way or the other, but we um, should understand that even so, it wouldn't have been, you know, a wonderful thing to be confined to soldiers' quarters. Even in 2025, I mean, soldiers don't have an awful lot of um, creature comforts, right? They've got small bed, everything's neat and tidy, and that's about it. So here in Caesarea, Paul, he would have also enjoyed diminished Jewish influence. He would have also enjoyed a court which favored his Roman citizenship over the Jewish traditions, over the Jewish laws that would have been a lot more influential in Jerusalem. So theoretically, Paul has things in his favor here in Caesarea. So that's the end of chapter 23. Next time, we're going to have a chance to be on a fly on the wall in Paul's defense before Felix. And we'll also notice the crafty and the cunning allegations that are cleverly woven and leveled against him. And there can be no doubt by the craftiness of them and the way the words are twisted that these things are driven by Satan. And ultimately, we want to remember that Paul's challenges, the problems he's dealing with, it's not because of the people, right? Ultimately, we know it all goes back to Ephesians chapter 6. We don't war against flesh and blood. It's not because of jealousy. It's not because of nationality. It's not because of laws. It's not because of problems with people. It's a problem with the author of sin driving these things, the prince of the power of the air. And he's going to stir people up against Paul and try to thwart God's plan every step of the way, just like he does in your life, just like he does with the work in the world today. So we'll get into that. We may also, if we make it through chapter 24, we'll be introduced as well to Festus, who was Felix's successor. So we'll fast forward several more years, 2 more years in the next chapter. So I'll just read through the discussion questions very briefly for anybody who may watch this later. And the first one is referencing Acts 23, verse 6 through 10. When Paul realized he was in danger, he used his Roman citizenship and divided the council. Was that strategic wisdom or manipulative tactics? How can Christians discern when to defend themselves and when to simply trust God? So, one discussion question there. Second discussion question is based on Acts 23, verse 12 through 15. Over 40 men took a vow to kill Paul. What does this teach us about how religious fervor can be twisted into evil? And how can we ensure that our zeal aligns with God's heart? So, those are the two discussion questions. Hopefully, you can stick around and discuss them with us tonight. Otherwise, thank you for tuning in.